Our speaker today is familiar to us. He's spoken before, most recently on Lincoln and his Chester County connections. He's Malcolm Johnston from the Chester County Community Foundation, local historian, and he's going to speak this morning on art, architecture, and artisans, how they improve the Westchester community. So without further ado, Malcolm.
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all. So first thing I'm going to ask you, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, so we got that. Now, the tricky part is, pulling up the PowerPoint, which I'll be using here. I'm going to click on that right now, and we will take it. Are you all able to see that? I'm going to guess that you're not.
Not yet.
So I am going to go back to here. I need to share the screen. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. Click that little share screen and then highlight the screen that has your PowerPoint, then click share screen.
Okay. Well, I'm clicking on that and I'm not seeing it.
Well, let's see. You have your PowerPoint, so you see it on your laptop?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Go to the green icon on the bottom on share screen.
No, I have to go to the Zoom. And so I got the share screen. And it says I can share.
Yeah.
But it's actually not. Oh, I see. Wait a minute. So
there
I just said,
go.
okay, now
Got
we're
it.
cooking.
Yep.
Now you got
And
it.
I'll take it then
From beginning, yep.
from beginning. So
Perfect.
now we're good. This is the first time I've done this particular thing. I appreciate you helping me through this. So now I know a little bit more than I knew a few seconds ago. And as you had mentioned, we're here to talk about art, architecture, and artists, how the expressive culture influence the development of our community. And I'll be bouncing around just a little bit, going back and forth from art and architecture and the artists. And I'm going to get architects as well as visual artists, as well as musical artists involved in this discussion, and talk about some of the high points, which include the things that may be of specific interest to you all, and particularly anyone associated with Presbyterian Church. To start out with, we're going to go all the way back to the 1830s. On the left-hand side, there's a picture of Thomas U. Walter. He was a young man in his 30s, just barely into his 30s, and he was trying to make himself a reputation. That reputation would lead him to designing the dome on the nation's Capitol building, which you see on the right-hand side. Thomas U. Walter is probably the most important architect that we have here in Westchester, and he took enough paintings of himself so that we get a pretty good idea of what he looked like and what he was like. But what he did was come to Westchester in 1834, and he was asked to design a new church over on Miners Street at Darlington. It was, back in those days, simply a field. It had been an old farm, a 100-acre farm, but a fellow by the name of William Everhart purchased the farm, developed his own home on a giant lot, and he dedicated this space to the Presbyterians because he was himself a Presbyterian, and he thought it'd be very convenient to be able to walk right across the street to attend the services at the Presbyterian Church. And they hired Thomas U. Walter to design this church. This picture comes from the 1950s, and it shows you what it looked like. It's done in what is known as Greek Revival, which was a new and getting to be very popular trend in architecture. And it was the very first commission that Thomas U. Walter had here in Westchester. But you'll notice in looking at this picture that it's missing a very important church-like item, which would be a steeple. So what the folks did a few years back, they had the design for a steeple, but they could not afford to actually put the steeple on the original church. And so what they did is decided to finish the job. And here we have a couple of pictures of a steeple being constructed back just a few years ago, that 2013, as a matter of fact, when they finished the steeple and made the church what it looks like today, which is this. This is one of the most outstanding historic preservation projects I have ever seen. To be able to take architectural documents from 150 years ago and apply it to new construction on a historic building and have it absolutely blend in and indeed add to the integrity of the building is absolutely unfounded. It just does not happen anywhere, but it definitely happened on this structure here in Westchester. I'm going to go way back even before that to the first artistic expression that we have in Westchester, and that was the head of a Turk. And this head of a Turk ended up being the logo for one of three structures in 1762 to be precise. There was a schoolhouse, a livery stable, and there was a gentleman who wanted to have a bar. And so he opened the Turk's Head. The sign of the Turk was the logo that was placed on the structure so that people could recognize that it was the tavern of choice in what was just a settlement that became known as Turk's Head until 1788, when it was founded as Westchester. It was in 1788 that Westchester became the county seat for Chester County, and that started the community off and running. One of the settlements here in Westchester, and what is regarded as the earliest settlement, though there is some debate about that, is known as the Dower House. And this is a very interesting structure because of its history. First of all, it's at the northern boundary of the borough of Westchester. And it was built reputedly in 1712, although some dates vary all the way up to 1780. But it really doesn't make any difference. This is regarded as the first settlement of the Dower House. Family under the head of Mary Wall built it. And by the 1920s, a family was living in the house and they noticed that it was deteriorating and they wanted to do a restoration, but they wanted it to be accurate. So they hired a person by the name of Brognard. This guy's name is a great name. And of course, it's slipping my mind, but it's Brognard Oakey. What a great name. How can you forget a name like Brognard Oakey? And he settled into this house. He actually lived here with the family for a while he was doing a preservation project on it, and he wrote a book about it. It's one of the earliest examples of historic preservation in the country. And Brognard Oakey has become renowned for being the father of preservation, and it started here in Westchester. And it's a little bit of a side note here when the assessments, tax assessments on property were developed. Each assessed property has a three-digit number, three numbers that are applied to the assessment. And the number for this particular parcel is 010101. And so in many regards, it's the first. And then when we talk about interpretation, that goes way back to the 1820s. The Marquis de Lafayette made a visit to Westchester in 1825, and he stood at a particular point on what is now Lafayette Street, about a half a block from Marshall Square Park, and he reviewed the troops in 1825, or what was remaining of those troops. They wanted to commemorate that, and they really didn't have much in the way to do that except for gravestones. So they took what might have been a gravestone and turned it into an interpretive. As far as I know, this is the earliest interpretive of a historic event in Westchester, where it talks about the Marquis de Lafayette, who was reviewing the troops that were escorting him during his visit to Westchester. Now, that was in 1825. We are celebrating the 200th anniversary of Lafayette coming to the United States. And again, he came to the Brandywine battlefield through Chester County and spent some 3 days, I believe, at least 2 days in Westchester. And we're commemorating that in July of this year. So keep your eye out for that commemoration and the events that surround that. Then we get into early architecture. And here we have two outstanding examples of architecture. The brick building is known as Darlington Building. We regard it as the oldest commercial building in Westchester, certainly in the downtown. It's called a federal style building, somewhat of vernacular for Westchester. It was built in 1789 and remains standing to this day. Next to it, on the left-hand side, just north of the building, you'll see a structure that looks not unlike the Presbyterian Church. Indeed, they're both Greek Revival, and that is the first National Bank of Chester County building, commonly known as simply the Bank of Chester County. It's still a bank, although it's Wells Fargo at this particular point in time, but it's a magnificent example, certainly on the facade, of Greek Revival. And it was done by Thomas U. Walter. He was hired to do this, his second or third commission in Westchester, I believe. And this is a grand building. And I recall hearing about this building when I was a student at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. I have to tell you that I graduated as a musician on the West Coast. And I recall going into a class and having someone who was familiar with Westchester talk about that Thomas U. Walter building, and the fact that when you walked inside, it felt like you were walking into a church. And he thought that Thomas U. Walter was being snarky in his design and creating a space that would be like a temple to money. Yeah, and I was affected by this. I thought, wow, somebody's really making some type of statement in doing this, however underhanded it might be. I don't think that's true. I think that Thomas U. Walter, he knew how to design churches. He had done at least one or two before this, and it was simply the way that you design something. Although when you do walk inside, you definitely get kind of that feeling of majesty that churches have. But perhaps the most interesting part of this is that it's the only building that I know about that is actually signed by the architect. You can see the signature of Thomas U. Walter up in the eaves from the portico at front. And as you look up to the ceiling, you'll see etched into the wall, Thomas U. Walter, architect. He wanted to get his name out there. He wanted to make a name for himself indeed. And he was able to get other commissions. The grandest commission came in the 1840s. As I had mentioned to you, there was a courthouse that helped establish Westchester as the county seat for Chester County, but that courthouse became obsolete by the 1840s, and there needed to be a new courthouse. Well, it turns out that Thomas U. Walter was halfway through having built this courthouse, because in 1838, on the original courthouse, of which we have no actual photographs, he was asked to design a clock tower. They needed to have a clock that would ring each hour on the hour, because trains were coming and going and they had to keep to their time. Appointments had to be held, and clocks were very expensive in households. And that clock tower and the bell that rings to this day, every hour on the hour, could be heard throughout the borough. And so that clock tower on the very first courthouse was replaced onto this courthouse that was completed in 1848. And as I mentioned to you, it was Thomas Hugh Walter's grandest example of architecture. Again, that Greek revival that actually gave Westchester the nickname of the Athens of the West, having so many Greek revival facades in and around the area. Here's a more contemporary image of the courthouse. This shows that it's in pristine shape. It's gone through a number of restorations to keep it this way, and is truly a treasure, not only for Westchester, but the entire county. So Westchester as a borough has struggled a little bit with identity. And we have on the left-hand side the seal of Westchester. Nearly all municipalities have some type of seal. This is the Borough of Westchester's seal. And you can see 1799 to 1999, it was in celebration of the bicentennial back in 1999. And of course, it has what we all should know on its shield, those values that are shared within the community. On the right-hand side, you see what is the flag of Westchester. Just a couple of years ago, this flag was approved by Borough Council to be the official flag. And while you can't do a design like this without getting pretty much half the population not liking it and being vocal about that, it certainly was the case with this flag. But it is designed with international flag design requirements. And I think that actually the borough did a very fine job with this. By the way, it emulates the crossroads of Westchester. So you have the almost north and south crossroads intersecting with the almost east-west crossroads of Westchester. And as you know, Westchester is on point, so nothing really actually goes totally north or south within the borough. But it's not the only design. When I first arrived in 2001 to be the first manager of the Westchester Business Improvement District, otherwise known as Downtown Westchester, we needed a logo for downtown. Steve Pinkston took the picture on the left and he transformed that into an image. And you can see it on the right, where in red, not to make too much of an impression there, but you have our logo of Westchester. It's for downtown, but it can be adopted by anybody within Westchester. And sure enough, I began seeing it on police cars and other folks who enjoyed the logo enough. And the identity of the clock tower on the historic courthouse, which can be seen from all over the area, the immediate area. And that became the trademark design for downtown Westchester. Now, the county eventually ran out of room at the historic courthouse. So right next door, they built a building in 1966, and this is the building that they built. It's now known as 10 North High Street, thus the number 10 there. And it became the offices for the county commissioners and other administrative uses. It's now in private ownership by Eli Comm, but it still remains to be offices. When it was built in 1966, there were a lot of people who thought it was pretty plain. And they had a point to that. The county commissioners took that to heart and decided to add artwork to that. So they went to this fellow right here, Harry Rosen. Harry Rosen is a Pennsylvania artist. He had done quite a few sculptures around the state, and they asked him to do a stone relief or two or three, actually four, because they wanted to hide the one string of buildings on the facade and decorate those with art. And so he created what was known as a stone reliefs. There are four stone reliefs, and each panel is 10 feet high, 5 feet wide, 1 foot thick, and together they weigh 18 tons. It depicts several Chester County historical figures, including George Washington and Marquis de Lafayette. You probably can recognize them right there. If you can't, you'll have to take my word for it that they are indeed there. And it may or may not be the largest and most significant artwork, not only in Westchester, perhaps the entire region. Next time you're on High Street between Gay and Market Street, look up a little bit and have a look at this particular sculpture. We plan at the Cultural Alliance to rededicate this sculpture and actually add the name of the artist, who's Harry Rosen. I think he deserves credit for making such a significant piece of art. Another important person is Harry Lewis Rowland. He was asked to do a statue that would honor the Civil War veterans in 1915. 50 years, what was left of Civil War veterans would be honored, and certainly all Civil War veterans, living and dead. But in 1950, they wanted to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the end of the Civil War. And so he came up with a Soldiers and Sailors Monument, now known today as Old Glory. Old Glory, of course, is the flag. On the left-hand side, you can see a postcard that is advertising that on June 11, 1915, they're going to unveil Old Glory. And then on the right-hand side, you see Old Glory as he stands today. It's probably the most photographed artistic work that we have in Westchester. But there are three things that are somewhat peculiar about this. Look at both of them, and you'll notice that the soldier is not wearing a hat. To see a military person not wearing a hat, that would indeed provide an idea of what the rank was, almost unheard of. But no, he's not wearing a hat. And when you look at pictures of other males gathering in Westchester, you hardly see anybody not wearing a hat. And then you also notice that the clothes are a little bit clingy in an odd sort of way. It turns out that the model modeled in the nude for the artist, and then the artist clothed the naked statue with more metal. And it gives it kind of a translucent quality, perhaps. That's probably not the right word, but the best that I could come up with that have more than 2 syllables. Anyway, the most peculiar part is that look at the picture on the left and you'll see that Old Glory is carrying a saber or a sword or a bayonet. I think it's referred to as a bayonet. If you look at the right, you can see there is no bayonet in his hand. That bayonet actually disappeared shortly after this was dedicated, and no one has found it since. Nor does anyone have any idea why that bayonet was either broken off or somehow removed. Perhaps some people thought it might be that the peace-loving Quakers wanted to give a nod to nonviolence and had it removed. That's the best that anyone can come up with so far. And now we go to the musical arts. And here we have Samuel Barber, a very young Samuel Barber on the left. Samuel Barber was born in Westchester. He grew up in Westchester, and he actually became quite famous in Westchester, certainly within the region. He was a precocious composer. On the right-hand side, you see an older Samuel Barber making eye contact with the statue. He's somewhat whimsical on that. It's one of my favorite pictures. But Samuel Barber, from the very beginning, made an impression upon the musical arts community. And as you know, the Adagio for Strings, which has appeared in a number of movies and concerts, is his best known piece. So how do you interpret someone like Samuel Barber? He actually left as a young man after high school and college, went up to New York, but he still is revered as a favorite son. And if you go down to Church Street at Minor, you'll see Samuel Barber's boyhood home. And there are actually a couple of interpretives there. The one on the porch is my favorite interpretive in Westchester. Samuel Barber was born in 1910, right there in Westchester, and the family lived there from 1919 to 59. But the best part about this is what it says on the bottom. From our community, Samuel Barber went forth to enrich and inspire the world with his music. I think that really sums it up in one sentence, and you don't even need punctuation. And that is the story that begs to be told, not only with his music, but also with him as a composer and how he changed music. And if we compare that to another interpretive that we see at 33 South High Street, where Samuel Barber was actually born and as a very young boy lived, it simply says Barber born 1910. Doesn't give a lot of background on why that's important. In fact, it doesn't give any background at all. But it nevertheless is an attempt to keep someone like Samuel Barber within the thought processes of our community. I myself, as I mentioned to you, I'm a musician, and I thought it'd be a really great idea to begin to bring other musicians into the downtown and utilizing the auditorium at what was then the Chester County Historical Society and what is now the Chester County History Center. I brought in these fine young students. It's a Baroque ensemble, and they did a fabulous performance years ago. And I thought that's something we need to do more of. Now, the university has some fabulous venues, more now than ever before. It's a great music department and some very, very talented people. And we need to get more of these musicians coming in. That was certainly my thought process. And not to get too personal, but I actually connected with a number of musicians. This happens to be the I'm playing a Vivaldi concerto with the Appassionata string quintet under the direction of a young woman by the name of Ari Cole. And I did this performance in '07. It was my last formal performance on the guitar. Vivaldi concerto for guitar. It went pretty well. I have fond memories of it and only one photograph, so I thought I'd share it with you. But all of this culminated into what I think is a landmark event, which was to bring a theater downtown. You might recognize this as the old Armory building on North High Street. It is now the Uptown Knauer Performing Arts Center. And I'm proud to have been part of a community effort to raise money. I was able to bring in some government funds for economic development, about $200,000. And the beauty of those funds that came in is that it's a grant to loan. So while the theater development folks were able to use the $200,000 to finish off the theater, that money will eventually get paid back to the borough and recycled into more economic development projects. It's a gift that keeps on giving. This is one of everybody's favorite artists, of course, Horace Pippin. And Horace Pippin was born and raised in Westchester. He has a interpretive in front of his boyhood home and, well, family home on West Gay Street. And I think it's fitting that another artist did a rendering of Horace Pippin. He was wounded during World War II and his service in the Army there. but he spent his life doing art. And his art has very, very much caught on. He's become very popular, so popular that places such as the History Center in downtown uses this photograph that was used for that painting to simply remind us that you can find history at the History Center there on Chestnut and High Street in downtown. Here's a picture that Horace Pippin did. It's called Harmonizing. And he's simply set up his easel across the street from these gentlemen who were singing. This is up on West Gay Street. You actually see the steeple on the left-hand side of St. Agnes Church. I've been told by people alive today that they would see Horace Pippin wandering around, setting up his easel and doing pictures of Westchester, which includes this one of the historic, our historic courthouse. There's Old Glory there. He even grabs the fountain down in the lower left-hand side, and of course, part of the clock steeple that all was designed by Thomas Hugh Walter, now painted by Horace Pippin. His very last artwork in 1946 is one of his most famous ones, and certainly including here in Westchester, Man on a Bench. And it's a red bench, and that red bench can be seen at Everhart Park. It's taken care of by the folks who are helping Everhart Park remain a vital part of our community. And there are several people who pose on that bench, have their picture taken in honor of the painting that was, as I mentioned, Horace Pippin's last painting. So you can see art imitating reality right there, and in some cases, reality imitating art. Marshall Square Park is one of the oldest parks in America, 1846. It predates Central Park in New York by several years. And Marshall Square is a place where artwork can be done. We're seeing more and more art coming in. There's, of course, a fountain there. We have a Civil War memorial. And my favorite one, however, is this artwork done by chainsaw artist Marty Long. I'm sorry, chainsaw artist Marty Long. And it turns out that there was an old oak tree, a red oak tree, 150 years old, no longer viable. It had died, and they cut it down, but they left a significant portion of the trunk. And Marty came along and created this sculpture, which includes 4 owls, 2 squirrels, a fox, skunk, hummingbird, dragonfly, and of course, a gnome. Who can resist the gnome? This caught the attention of the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission, which did a little article on this that reflects the history and the art and the presence of a historical place like Marshall Square Park. And people come from all around to see this and the other features of the park right here in the borough of Westchester up on the north side. And there are other attempts to ensure that people know about those who made history in Westchester, as well as artists that are living today and doing their artwork. There is a cultural historical commission in place over at the borough, and they came up with these banners that are currently appearing on the unit block of East Gay Street, actually the 2 unit blocks of East Gay Street. On one side is a brief description of a historical person. Here you can see Marianne Shadd Carey, who's one of my very favorites. It was a young African-American woman who was wanted to become a school teacher. She couldn't do it in New Jersey where she lived because she wanted to teach African-American children, and that was not allowed by law to educate African-American children. She and her family relocated to Westchester, And she started school, I believe the first school in Pennsylvania exclusively for African-American children. And for a long time, she taught there. In the 1850s, she became an activist. She actually moved to Canada for a while, where she opened a newspaper and became the first African-American newspaper owner, as well as a woman. And so she was very active with the abolitionist movement, and a lot of that started right here in Westchester. On the other side of each one of these banners is a separate artwork from a local artist, and those have all, when they come down, they are given back to the artist, so it becomes a souvenir for the artist. But again, you can see these from the sidewalk when you walk around East Gay Street in downtown Westchester. And I thought I'd throw in a little trivia here. Not that Abraham Lincoln is trivial, he's not. He's considered by many, including me, as among the greatest of presidents. But what a lot of us don't know is that there is a Lincoln statue in Chester County. We may not know that where it is actually located. And if you were waking up in the middle of the night wondering where the Lincoln statue in Chester County is, I will tell you. If you already know this, then you're way ahead of me. But he can be found at Freedom's Foundation, the Medal of Honor Grove. If you're in Phoenixville and you're driving, I believe, on Highway 29 into the national park there at Valley Forge, on the left-hand side, you will see Freedom's Foundation. And at the Medal of Honor Grove, there you'll find Abraham Lincoln, who is apparently giving his 70 years ago speech, all in metal. Now, it's not the only statue there. It's well worth a trip and to walk around. There's George Washington and a number of others, as well as Medal of Honor Grove, all of which is very, very inspiring.
Malcolm, I think that's Route 23, not Route 29.
Okay, Route 23. Thank you very much. So don't get lost. If you're in Phoenixville, don't take the wrong road. And you do have to kind of look for it. It does have a sign, but you have to keep your eye peeled as you're going into Valley Forge to be on the left-hand side. So here we have, speaking of Abraham Lincoln, the Lincoln Building. Project I'm currently working on is to get funding for a restoration. It looks like it's in good shape. This picture comes from the 1950s, but even if you look at it today, it looks like it's in good shape, but the foundation was not made of the best materials. And indeed, upon closer inspection, you'll see that there is significant deterioration. That can be remedied for a relatively small amount of money when it comes to restorations, about $50,000. And I'm seeking both public and some private donations to do the restoration. We actually have come up with the private match for the public funds, and that will be the last action in the funding part for about a $50,000 restoration project. Again, a relatively small amount of money. Anytime that you want to tour this building during normal business hours these days, and when we get into summertime, we hope to extend those into the weekend, you can visit and someone will take you through, will be happy to take you through the Lincoln Building to see the various items of both trivia and historical fact that reside there at the Lincoln Building. The lower level, which used to be a tea room, is now an interpretive for Abraham Lincoln and the fact that his first biography was written there. And speaking of trivia, I made note of the fact that on February 11th of 1860, when the very first biography of Abraham Lincoln was published right there at the Lincoln Building in the lower level, that's where the printing press was. It was on the Chester County Times, and we do have facsimile of that in the Lincoln Room, so you can observe it yourself. But on February 11th, 1860, that publication took place. It was sent all around Pennsylvania and New York and introduced Abraham Lincoln to the electorate. 1 year to the day later, Abraham Lincoln boarded a train out of Springfield, Illinois, to begin his journey as president of the United States. And I thought, that's kind of interesting. 1 year, it took him 1 year from his introductory article to through an election, and then he was boarding his train and giving his farewell speech to the residents at Springfield. So like I said, you can learn more about the Lincoln Building. You can certainly learn a little bit more about me, not too much more, but a little bit more by Googling Cultural Alliance of Chester County. You can also log into downtownwestchester.com to learn more about that. And it will tell you where to park, where to shop, where to eat, all those wonderful things if you don't already know them. But we anticipate that the Cultural Alliance become more and more important. I've only been working there for about 8 months at this particular point in time. So we're an emerging organization, part of the Chester County Community Foundation, which is doing such an outstanding job these days in philanthropy. And I would like to remind you to keep your eye out for a County Lines magazine that will go into detail of the things that are happening with the Chester County Community Foundation, including the Lincoln building. There's a 2-page trivia article on that coming out in March. And if you pick up this month's County Lines magazine, you can see some of the historic preservation awards, outstanding things that have happened recently in historic preservation, both with private and public property. So there's plenty to learn about when it comes to history and historic preservation in Westchester. And I feel very privileged to have shared at least a little bit of that with you. And with that, I will open the floor, if you will, to any questions or comments or conversation. Again, thank you very much for your kind attention.
Hi, Malcolm. It's Wayne Zimmerman. I joined your presentation a little bit late, but one of the things that I'm very much interested in is the movie and vaudeville theaters and so forth. I know that Westchester had 3 theaters at one time. The only one that I can recall being in some years ago before it was demolished was the Warner Theater. Do you folks have any detailed information about those 3 theaters?
Well, we have quite a bit of information on the Warner Theater. There's actually even a video about the old Warner Theater. They were trying to save the theater back, I believe, in 1980. And, you know, it was a for-profit theater back in those days. And these days, for-profit theaters are very, very difficult. Not impossible, but they can be difficult to manage. Part of the success for the Uptown Canauer Performing Arts Center is that it's completely nonprofit, and that allows it opportunities for funding that would not be available for-profit type of theaters. And you're absolutely correct at alluding that the Warner Theater was a magnificent theater. It's built in 1930. It's part of Art Deco buildings that are on North High Street, a cluster of buildings, Art Deco. The structures on High Street remain intact. It was a theater that was demolished, the actual auditorium. Yes. It's now found a new life as the Hotel Warner. And so it still contributes to our economy by bringing visitors in to spend their time and money in downtown Westchester.
Yeah, the organization with which I'm associated at one time, some years ago, considered putting a theater pipe organ into the Warner Theater, but in examining the building itself, we found that the basement had a lot of water problems. And of course, that's where the blower and some of the mechanical equipment would go. So we kind of crossed it out, but it's a shame that it was torn down because it was a nice auditorium.
Oh, it was fabulous. Yeah, it was a wonderful auditorium. Yes. Yeah. One of the great pre-depression theaters, you know, it opened in 1930. So they did not spare they didn't spare a dime they made that just as magnificent as they could.
Mm.
Malcolm, one of the top architects in Westchester in the late 1800s was T. Roney Williamson, and
Yes.
he put up some or designed buildings at the college, and he did the tower at Holy Trinity Episcopal, and probably the Oakbourne Mansion here in Westtown. And I'm just wondering, by the time frame, if he was at all involved in designing Westminster Presbyterian Church.
I don't know about the Presbyterian Church. I believe that he was involved in several buildings downtown, including the annex to the courthouse and the library, the public library up on North Church Street. And evidently, if I'm correct in this, and I'm using my memory, so you never know about that, but that fabulous fire company over on Church Street in the unit block of Church Street, it's now a restaurant, but it's such a whimsical facade on that. So he's had a very positive effect, and I really enjoy his architecture. Everything I've ever seen him do is always very interesting.
The the church Westminster, that's a little bit at the edge of the town going to Wilmington.
I'm on mute or not, but I think you can get him now.
Beg pardon? That was Samuel Crothers and Tom Daly, who were the architects for that. And it was very nice that the Tom Daly was the son of the sort of ceramic sculptor named Crothers, named Daly, and his artwork is in the many museums, but also in the church ceramic type things. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Malcolm?
Yes.
Malcolm? Are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Go ahead. Okay. Going back to there you are. Okay. Can you hear me? Because it says we're muted here.
Yeah,
Okay.
we got you.
If you go back to the Pippin painting of harmonizing,
Yes.
there's another sort of a hidden meaning to that painting. And if you look at each of the singers, they have different type clothes on. And there they are. You know, one is dressed up in great clothes all the way over to somebody in bib overalls.
Ah.
And that was part of the idea of harmonizing, not just the singing, but that different people from different,
walks of life,
whatever, yeah, could sing together and make good music.
That's a great observation. I had not recognized that, but you're absolutely correct. So thank you very much for that information. That's great. Dave?
I have a question about kind of one of the homes that is historic within, whose address is Westchester, 21 Oakland Drive, is the Britton House. I just wanted your thoughts about including that in the historic architecture and discussions of the future.
Well, I think that you're correct. We need to, include everyone. It's one of those peculiar Pennsylvania things where you have boroughs that have boundaries that do things like go through high schools, And when we think of Westchester, if we were in almost any other state besides Pennsylvania, Westchester would be the two zip codes. and the borough would be a city of the two zip codes 19380, 19382. And it just seems that, we have to deal with a somewhat archaic thing that we have a borough and then the Westchester region, but they all have Westchester addresses if they have one of those two zip codes. So, and there are actually 4 zip codes here. The university has one, and then there's another one for something else. And maybe, I certainly would be an advocate of being inclusive rather than exclusive. I focused on downtown and the surrounding borough just because I happen to live here and I enjoy it. I walk by all those things that we talked about, but that's not meant to preclude any other outstanding achievements outside the borough.
Thank you.
How did you get here from San Francisco, Malcolm?
Well, it was, I went to school in San Francisco, so I only spent a few years there. I actually grew up in Santa Barbara. I was living in Oregon, and in 1985, I made kind of a career change to become a downtown manager and do community development, downtown development type of things. I was downtown manager in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, but when Westchester was looking for a new manager, of which I'm qualified to, I enjoy being a startup manager. I came out to interview for the job, and I fell in love with the community because it's such a beautiful community. And to Main Street managers like myself and people associated with the National Trust, Westchester is the center of the world from an architectural point of view. There are well over 3,500 structures in Westchester alone that are listed in the National Register of Historic Places. So this seems like a natural place for somebody who has desires like I do to use heritage tourism and historic preservation to promote a community.
Thank you.
So
Yeah,
there we are.
Looking in the history of the church in Westchester, and it references the architect was a man named Arthur Stanley Cochran in 1893. Is that familiar at all?
No, I'm afraid that it's not for me. But it definitely would bear looking up. And I think that any architects who have structures that continue to be extant should be given credit for the contribution that they made, both for design and social reasons. Well, I would like to thank you all again for inviting me to participate with you all. I've very much enjoyed making this presentation, and I understand that it's being recorded or has been recorded. And when that recording comes out, I'll give it a view myself, but feel free to share that with anyone. And I hope I can see you again on some future presentation.
Thank you, Malcolm. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Malcolm.
Thank you. Let us know when
Thanks,
you have
Malcolm.
a new topic. Dave Goodell, you're the speaker next week. You want to give a brief synopsis of what you'll be talking about?
No, he
I
doesn't.
think Dave dropped off.
Oh, well, okay. Well, he'll be speaking about the Gospel of John, I believe. So I guess that's it for this week. Everybody have a good week. We'll see you next Tuesday.